Hello and welcome to Some of My Friends Read Comics. We got Vans.
My money.
Whoa, we got Chris.
Let's play cards, boss.
And I'm Ki. Welcome to the show. It's we got some wrestling action happening on the show today. We are reading all about Andre the Giant. I think this was just Vince's goodwill to because he knows Chris and I love to talk about wrestling, and now it's a chance for us to actually talk about wrestling on the show. So for one night only, some of my friends love.
I'm putting you guys over. I'm letting y'all become the heroes.
That's a wrestling.
Or no, are you
Thank
making me the hero? Was I the heel that was making
We're
y'all
not
talk about
putting
wrestling?
you over, Vince.
Okay,
We're
y'all are the faces
boy.
that wanted to talk
Yes.
about wrestling, and I was the heel that was like,
Yeah.
no,
not necessarily.
not in
That's
my
not
business.
necessarily. You
That's
weren't.
right.
You weren't stopping it. This is two faces and another face joining forces to make a new faction. That's what's happening. But also, this is important. We're starting our new long read as well. We had a good time reading the first 12 issues of Spider-Man the last bunch of episodes, the last 12 episodes exactly. And then for the next 12, we're going to be reading The Life and Times of Scrooge Mcduck by Don Rosa. I'm excited for this. We'll talk more about that when we get to it here later in the show. But yeah, Andre the Giant. There was first off, I think, Vince, we got to talk about this. Is by Brian Box Brown and a publisher, First Second.
Yes.
Is the name of the publisher. Yes?
Yeah. So Brian,
Tell us about this. I've never heard.
So Brian Box Brown, he went by Box Brown, but when you look up Box Brown on Amazon or anything, it just shows you pictures of brown boxes. So, so the SEO wasn't great. So he's now Brian Box Brown, but he's written a lot of autobiographical comics, or not autobiographical, just biographical comics. He wrote this one about Andre the Giant. He wrote another one about Andy Kaufman. He wrote one about Alexei Pajitnov and the creation of Tetris. That's really
The
good as well.
Tetris guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he also wrote a book about the history of cannabis and the illegalization in America, which is pretty good, but I feel like not as it's trying a little too hard. I think the Adam Ruins Everything episode about cannabis was a little better, but it comes from a similar place. So he just seems to write, and he seems to pretty much just write for this publisher, First Second, which is a publisher has been around since like 2006, and I pick up their books every now randomly, and I would say that pound for pound, this publisher is probably, if you pick up anything of theirs, it's probably pretty good. Their first big hit was American Born Chinese by Gene Yang. Who's done a lot of books with them. He wrote Superman Smashes the Klan, but American Born Chinese is pretty big. This One Summer by Mariko Tamaki was also really big. She's a big DC writer now, but she got her big break with that. And I really
Did you
like
do the Green Lantern series for that DC? I don't remember.
She might have. I think she might be doing Wonder Woman or Batgirl now, but she definitely did a Harley Quinn Breaking Glass a few years ago. That's very popular. And the Prince and the Dressmaker, that was won the Eisner for like best comic from last year by Jen Wang, I think. That was a great book. So they just seem to like be not necessarily targeting the superhero group, but just seem to be targeting just like weird comics that are all like graphic novels, and they're pretty consistently good. I've enjoyed everything I read from them.
Cool. Oh, yeah. How long has this publisher been around?
Since
I feel like I don't.
I saw.
Yeah, 2006.
They also like published like Scott McCloud, the guy who wrote like Understanding Comics, like his first fiction work since Zot. They published that in 2015. So
Interesting.
Good for them, I guess.
I bet it's not good. Like Zot is kind of weird, but the man knows how to read fucking comics.
Yeah, based on the third or second, whatever the making comics. I'm guessing he's not the best with this.
Oh. Yeah. I mean, after you write a whole series on how much you understand comics, it's you really gotta like, man,
Deliver.
Yep.
It's
Yeah,
tough.
especially when Kurt
I don't know how
Busiek
you
is the
can-
guy who's like handing you comics.
Yeah, I'm like, you're setting yourself up for failure here.
But that's not about here today. We're talking about Andre the Giant.
No.
Life
We are
Legend.
talking about
should talk about
Andre
this book.
the Giant by Brian Box Brown. So Vince, how much did you know about Andre the Giant before this? Is Andre the Giant like people know him outside of wrestling, right? Everybody knows.
Princess Bride, and that's about it.
Princess Bride, yeah. Oh,
He was in that movie.
okay. He was in that movie.
That's honestly what I knew him from, and I knew people liked him with wrestling, but I had no idea like what his eras were. There's also I had read this before the Andre the Giant HBO documentary from a few years ago, which I feel covers similar ground and similarly takes a detour middle way through just to explain the business of wrestling in the 70s and 80s. This book also has a glossary for all the wrestling terms at the back.
I like that glossary at the end one. I think it was a really good glossary. You clearly studied it. You must have made flashcards. I'm very proud of you.
I'm good.
Good job. Good job.
No, but I honestly don't know much about him. I mean, he's a giant dude. He was a wrestler.
Yeah.
And he was in Princess Bride, and then he died in the early 90s, really before my time.
Yeah. I mean, all that's correct.
All that is correct. So this book opens with Hulk Hogan. I forgot about this until I was reading back my notes because he never comes back.
I mean, he comes back at the end
as a character, but yeah,
as a character.
And this is also 2014, so this may be before Hulk Hogan's kind of downfall. And definitely before he killed Gawker.
I think that's around that time, isn't it?
Right? It's gotta be.
It's close in time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's yeah.
I mean,
close
in this book, we'll talk about it. Andre also a racist.
Yeah, this book is all about
Hulk Hogan.
We'll get to it. Keep going, Chris.
Chris, I know that like Nick tried to bait you into saying the N-word on your other podcast, Your Stupid Minds, but we will not do that here.
I refuse. I refuse on this show. I refuse on Your Stupid Minds. Yes. Hulk Hogan is introduced. Talks about Andre as a larger-than-life figure. Hulk Hogan, notorious liar.
He's a fucking good performer, though. He cried on that HBO documentary, also talking about Andre the Giant. I'm like, Hulk, you're a good actor.
I mean,
you're good.
That's the secret, is you believe it. I recently just watched Dark Side of the Ring: Ultimate Warrior. And the secret was Ultimate Warrior just became Ultimate Warrior when he had to be on camera.
He believed it.
Yeah, so this comic is a biographical comic. It has like a bibliography in the background, and it has like I watched this wrestling documentary and this wrestler's biography and this wrestler's autobiography to like get all these different Andre stories, and I'm like, was that just a thing of like WWF, WWE, like just making documentaries to like promote its own legend?
Well, I mean, WWF does do that, but there's also, I mean, a lot of these people are outside of WWF. Is just kind of the nature of it. So, we'll talk about it. Andre the Giant is made kind of a star by the WWF, but he also is a famous wrestler before that and during that too.
So what's important, and I think this book kind of gets into it a little bit, is that it doesn't really get into how much wrestling and the industry was changing and going towards like that TV style and how all the little territories were coming together, because wrestling like wasn't a big TV thing like it is now, or I don't even know if it is anymore. If you think,
but yeah, I mean, I got this from the HBO documentary, and this one hints at it, that it was like all like these decentralized traveling road shows, basically like a magic show or like a local band or something.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of what it is. And they do make that point in the in this comic, which I think is correct. But anyway, I think we should bring it up as it shows up.
Yeah, we're going to try to jump into it here. No, it's okay. It's okay. Well, one of the things I did want to say with this Hulk Hogan intro is that I just got off on the wrong foot with this book, because it gives me Hulk Hogan and then it gives me two like little asterisk footnotes things to like help explain things that they're talking about. And I'm like, this book already feels like very weirdly laid out. And then
what do you mean by that? Do you mean it's just like, is it
like,
explaining too much, or is it?
Because it just felt like a weird flow to like break it up and be like, there's like this whole intro. I don't know. It's something off about it. Maybe it's because it's about wrestling, and I was like, got to get it right for all the fans.
Yeah, see, but I'm like looking in, and I'm like, all my friends like wrestling, or some of my friends like wrestling and read comics. And I'm like, so I have like a tangential interest in it. Like our warm up every episode is y'all talking about wrestling, and then being like, "Yep, the levels look okay."
Vince, don't tell everyone.
That's our secret.
But
they're gonna have. We're cool.
Now anyone can make a podcast. They know.
But it seems like that's like I'm the target audience for this. Like somebody who's like wrestling interested, but like is not like actively watching the 6 to 9 hours of content produced each week.
I mean, I don't do that. Kia does.
I'm the only one who does that. And yeah, so we go to this first scene where Andre the Giant is a child, but he's like a gigantic child. How old was he here? Like 16?
Yeah, no, he's like 12.
12? 12. Yeah.
Famous true story that Samuel Beckett gave him a ride to school.
Yeah, in exchange for a bottle of Bougelot from Dad. Thanks, Dad.
He was waiting for Godot, but not for Andre.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, Andre. I'm mixing. Andre has he was a giant. He was giant when he was 12. He couldn't fit in the school bus, so playwright Samuel Beckett, not the one from Quantum Leap, had to come and pick him up because Andre basically his pituitary gland just didn't fucking stop. So it just kept giving him growth hormone as he would get bigger and bigger. So he was still growing up until his death, which is crazy.
Which Paul White had, but he had the surgery to stop so that he would stop growing.
I didn't know that, actually.
That was the guy who was the Giant in WCW and was the Big Show in WWF. He did have the surgery. I mean, he is like he's closing in on 50, I think, and he's doing okay, I think.
He just delivered a choke slam on Wednesday, so he's back at it.
Yep, he's.
We try to keep this show evergreen, Kia. So don't be like dating us by saying.
Listen, last Wednesday is evergreen. You can in most weeks of the year, in most weeks of life, you can just say Big Show probably chokeslammed someone last Wednesday, right?
Yeah. So yeah, he did get the surgery. It did become available later, but Andre has that problem, and you find out in pretty early on that it's a genetic issue. That his grandfather was also a giant, and so he's got this genetic condition where he's just going to keep growing.
But the heart's not, so it's got to pump for a bigger body. The bones are just gonna, it's a tough sit.
Yeah, it's bad.
Samuel Beckett gives him his first cigarette, which is probably not good, but he's 12, he'll be fine.
But yeah, I was gonna say he has the body of a giant man, so he can smoke a cigarette.
It's totally okay.
But at this point, I was reading this and I'm like texting all like my theater nerd friends. I'm like, oh my god, did you know this about Andre the Giant? So like this book is working on me.
So again, the pacing was just weird. I'm like, it's a 4-page scene of just him getting picked up by this bus, but the bus doesn't pick him up, and the sentences are like crossing over, like they start on one panel and they take a whole page to finish. And that was part of the thing that I'm just like, it flows so weird for me.
I can see that.
It's like, I don't know.
It is,
but the content of it is.
Yeah, I do feel like it reads better in the actual graphic novel. Like it's like page for page, like it's designed that way. If you're looking at individual panels, I don't think it flows as well. But I do like the sort of the way that it's divided on the page, which is pretty. I mean, this reads really fast compared to some of the stuff.
For a 250-page book, I was like, oh shit, I can't believe I did this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's quick. It's about an hour read, and it's super fast. Oh, well, I should mention we read this on archive.org. You can just check it out there. We're putting them over big time. So
they're doing
I laid down for archive.org. I was like, hit me, and they defeated me.
Yep. We get a bunch of vignettes of Andre the Giant just kind of like being big. He's having trouble getting out of the car, that sort of thing of like, when he's driving. Eventually he meets a hooker who also works at wrestling shows, and then he starts wrestling. Is that what happened here? Yeah. He starts as Giant Ferrer, who Ferrer was like a Paul Bunyan kind of like a legend, and so he kind of took that as his name. Then there's like a 10-page scene with some dudes at a bar who are drunk, and they think they see Andre, and it is Andre, and they're like, wrestling's fake. And then he gets in a fight with them. They run, they hide in a car, and Andre pushes the car over.
Yeah, he knocks the car over.
This is our first example of Andre being a dick. And this was a long. I swear, I'm gonna stop talking about the pacing of this book afterwards. But this was 10 pages out of 240 pages devoted to like a bar fight, and that's like it's all right. I'm done. Let's keep going.
It's got a lot of vignettes, and like the first time I read this, it felt very smooth. This time I read it, I was like, It's just like a lot of chopped up scenes that doesn't seem to really go anywhere. I mean, it's a biography, and life doesn't, have an arc necessarily.
And
But
I mean, I do understand the purpose of this one is basically that wrestling is fake, and we should say for all our listeners who've never heard of wrestling, wrestling is not real.
Work.
even Olympic wrestling.
No,
that
Olympic
is
wrestling is real, but
and like the thing is that even like pro wrestling, which is fake, has aspects of the real in it because they really are just like maneuvering with each other, and it's not all planned. Like just the finishes,
right.
Not all.
Right. Pro wrestling is it's a live theater type deal where basically what the finish is, but everything before that is up to the wrestlers. I mean, with varying levels of sort of how much gets sort of scripted. But the rest of it is kind of a live theater where you're trying to get the audience to react, and it's a thing where you are, trying to get the person who you think is the bigger star to be a bigger star.
Right. I mean, I think the show Glow on Netflix, I think there's
it's great.
like midway through the first season, one of the characters realizes like, oh, this is just a soap opera. I get it now. Like, I remember hearing like the integrity of like sports or it's fake. I'm like, it is no different than watching a live theater show where like there's a bad guy like twirling his mustache and you're like, boo, hate the bad guy. And then the good guy wins, and then you have to like push it forward. And like, I mean, this whole book arcs, but I mean, the idea of throughout all of wrestling history, like as they age out, then like the new young gun, like defeats the old guy to then, take over and then become like the new face of wrestling. Not face. That's a different term for my glossary term, but but I think that book explains that very well, especially when we get to like the final act of this, which we'll get to.
There's some things this book does really, really well that I like. So Andre goes to Japan. He's wrestling, meeting some people there. There's a language barrier between the promoters who are trying to understand what the doctors are telling them about, all the stuff we were discussing about Andre's conditions. Then he goes to America and he meets Vince Sr.,
Vince McMahon Sr.
Right. Not Vince McMahon Jr., who really hates being called Vince McMahon Jr. because he thinks it makes him not as powerful.
The 80-year-old crazy man who runs WWE.
He's from the meme of the head that's like, huh?
Yeah, he's like, oh, Stacy Keibler? What? Yeah, well, I'm sure he had that exact reaction when he saw Andre.
So one of the greatest heels of wrestling in all time, and legit one of the worst people in the world of all time. So he's a man of contrasts. Yeah.
Yes, he's lived the gimmick.
Yep. But Vince McMahon Sr. has the great idea to just move Andre around the territory. So it's like, okay, you'll wrestle up in the Northeast for a little while, then you'll kind of rotate around the country in all the different areas so you don't get overexposed, which is actually very brilliant. And it's something that Vince Jr. should really learn how to do.
Which they show before that. He goes in Canada and he's just working in the same promotion in Canada. And it's just like Andre versus Rick Martel, Andre versus other Canadian wrestler. And it's just like, well, Andre's like twice the size of these guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you get bored of him if you see him do the same thing too often.
Yeah, it's not that exciting when he's the guy. It's better for him to be sort of a traveling attraction.
Yeah, like if there was like a permanent circus versus like a circus that would roll into town every now and then. But it's so interesting because each of the territories would like trade people. So it'd be like, Andre the Giant's going to go hang out and do shows like in North Carolina, and then the North Carolina star wrestler is going to come to Louisiana. And so then Louisiana only sees him like once a year.
Right.
Kind of like, I guess, seeing Michael Jordan or LeBron.
Yeah, it
is. I mean, it's similar to that. And it's also similar in that, wrestling is one of the earlier, I mean, other than basketball, which at the same time was pretty low on kind of the totem pole. Like it is, you got all these stadiums, and he's doing stadium shows.
Mm-hmm. And this is like in the 60s, 70s. And
this is the 70s, early 80s.
Okay.
We get a really nice. I like these parts where they break down a match and just kind of do like I don't want to call it an infographic, but it's just kind of like an outline of what's happening and explaining it. And I really like these moments. These I think were the moments where it feels like the graphic novel earned itself, if that makes sense. Like nothing, I guess, with his size, the vignettes with his size, but there's not a lot of stuff in here. It's a lot of talking heads throughout this book.
Yeah, it
Um,
it is, but these particular scenes, I think you're right, and the comic medium is really good for that because it's like showing like
Yeah.
a wrestling match, but then being able to like point to arrows and be able to be like, this is what's actually happening, like the subtext of what's happening in this fight. I guess pop up video would be, which is a fucking dated reference, I know.
yeah.
Would be like
20
another,
years ago,
yeah.
pop-up video would have been.
But
I mean, honestly, it's like a sports recap. It's like you're watching the video, you pause, and you be like, "All right, here's what's happening here. Let's keep going."
But it's
Yeah,
such a good explanation for somebody like me
Yeah.
who's kind of a neophyte. It's like, here's who are the ostensibly the two bad guys, and then
Right.
Andre the Giant is your hero, and then here's how the bad guys sell a hit. So then they quote unquote cheat by having like a fake knife that then looks like, and then the ref is not paying attention. Oh my goodness! So then they fake stab Andre. But you know, it's really, I mean, it's fucking theater, and I love it.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
good.
yeah. I mean, I think it does do a good job of that. And yeah, you know, basically, because Andre is in this unique position where he's an attraction. People want to see this guy, but he's also too big to just like be defeated regularly. So you have to have these bad guys. Andre has to beat him up for a while, and then the bad guys have to cheat. Otherwise, you're like, this guy's too big.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the big challenges I think of wrestling is how do you make people look good in defeat, because like people have to lose. That's how it works, right?
Right.
And you don't want everybody to look
But I
bad.
mean, it's just any different than Spider-Man.
Right. And I guess it comes up later, you know, when Hulk Hogan becomes the guy, like it's the same thing where like Hulk Hogan is like 6'6" or 6'5" and like 300 pounds. Like he's enormous. And it's just like, how do you make this guy sympathetic? He's like a monster.
Yeah.
But they find a way.
They find a way. You mentioned Spider-Man, so now I have to mention, in another effort to make this podcast not evergreen, Triple A's Triple Mania was last night. It's a Mexican wrestling show. They have a Marvel match, and they had their Spider-Man character kind of propel in on like a zip line thing, but it was all like janky and erratic in its movements. It was a very weird. Anyway, that's shout out to Triple Mania.
We'll see. We'll see if any of those characters exist beyond this, because famously Brian Cage was at last year's Triple Mania, right, as one of these characters,
and this year, and then returned this year as well.
Yes, but then he immediately.
But it's just become a year. It's just a yearly thing they're doing, I think, of just these Marvel people put on a match because they continued on the story. They had Captain Marvel, Captain America, and Spider-Man versus Thanos, Venom, and who was the other bad guy? I don't remember. Black Widow.
Black Widow and Venom on the bad guy side.
Look, it just was. I'm just telling you. That's just what it was. Okay.
So anyway,
but the Hulk came in. I gotta text y'all this picture of the Hulk because he came in to save the day. How could I not? All right, I'm sending it to y'all right
anyway, Andre, he's also smart enough about wrestling. He goes to Japan. He goes to America. He knows kind of how to do things. They do see him. There's like a moment in where Vince McMahon Sr. sees him work, like he's doing drop kicks and he's doing stuff, and he's like, "That's good, but stop doing that."
Yeah, it's like you don't need to be good at all that stuff. You're a big giant. This is how we're gonna make you work for the fans. And you know,
which is basically like you need to learn how to not do anything, to just stand there and make the crowd react to you standing there when people attack you, to show how strong you are. That way, when things actually affect you, people will be like, "Oh wow, it even affected him." So yes, he's Then we kind of get
to be a star.
Yeah, we kind of get into the, I guess, second act of this, which is Andre becomes a drunk.
Yeah, he's a piece of shit. He goes on the Tonight Show, compares hands with Carson. He's like,
not
I'm
with Carson, not with Carson, with a guest. With a guest host. Because Carson would go on vacation and they wouldn't run reruns. They would just have somebody like Joan Rivers or somebody fill in. But it's funny because the bibliography and the source notes in the back say like, Vince McMahon definitely told everybody that Andre the Giant was on Carson, and that's fucking bullshit because he wasn't. He didn't. And he,
It's still the Tonight Show.
Yeah, but he didn't meet Carson, and it's a nice fudging of like, this is the good McMahon, like, kind of twisting the reality to make things sound better.
I did watch him on Letterman. That he was there. I watched the clip. It did happen.
Wait, who was the guest host then?
No, I mean that was just Letterman.
There's a letter scene with Letterman.
That's in '84. That's a little later, but yeah, he goes on Carson with the guest host. He compares the size of his hand. He's becoming a big star basically at this point.
Wait, no, okay. So I didn't get. So who was the guest host that he compared hands with?
Joey Bishop, who I don't know who that is.
Oh, damn! I thought it would be a better answer than that. Never mind.
Not that exciting.
That's why Vince McMahon didn't say he went on Carson.
Well-known guest host of the Tonight Show.
That's why he wouldn't say he went on Carson and compared hands with Joey Bishop. Like he wouldn't say that because that doesn't sound as fun.
Oh, good.
Oh, well, that's boring.
So Andre is it's a long scene where he's drinking at a bar and they're trying to kick him out and he won't leave. And
it's in Dallas too.
And this scene just kind of went on. Like they love scenes in bars. All the scenes in bars in this book go on for a bit.
Andre is a piece of shit in this book for a lot.
He sucks though.
Like,
he really.
Everybody's stories have been like Andre was the best, and like the documentary is like Andre was such a gentle giant, and everybody loved him.
I mean, it's a brief moment in the comic, but it does address like Andre is in constant pain. Like he is because of his pituitary gland, he is constantly growing. And like the pressure on his joints is crazy. So it's just like the book doesn't actually like explain like this is why he becomes a drunk for a while, but it's like that's why, like he's got a real pain issue and he just becomes a drunk to deal with it, to kind of self-medicate.
Wouldn't be the first time, I don't think.
No, and it isn't. But like, I mean, given his size, they talked about like, and I know they went in the HBO documentary like the amount of booze he has to drink he's like Wolverine.
Yeah.
Well, and also like, I mean, at the time they don't really explain this in the comic, but it's like at the time, if you're the guy who's drawing the house, you would get. It's not quite like what Floyd Mayweather would get, but it's kind of similar where it's like you're the guy. It was like 10 or 15% of the total box office would just go to the main event. And so like that's Andre every night.
Mm-hmm.
He's just spending that money on beer.
Yeah. That's yeah. And it's like, there's a lot of pressure on that. I know like Bo Burnham talked about that with performance, but I remember like Michael Jordan or like LeBron, we're going back to basketball. Like people go out of their way to go see like their shitty team just to go see Michael Jordan. You have to be like on. You can't have like an off night with that. It's very weird dynamic. Like it's,
right.
It's and we'll get to it, but like WrestleMania, like there were how many people like in that stadium on top of the pay-per-view?
There was 90,000 people at the WrestleMania that is covered later. It's one of the biggest shows ever until Roman Reigns destroyed that record.
Ooh. So we get another little play-by-play of a match that Andre is in. We get some more people talking about wrestling being fake in Vegas. There's a lot of talk about that here. Andre keeps getting drunk. He sleeps with a French woman. I think this is the one who like he ends up having a kid with her that he doesn't know about. Yeah,
it's unclear in the book, but yes, it seems to be.
Excuse me. There's a scene on a bus in Japan with a bunch of wrestlers who were there for a show. And every single person gets identified here, as well as where they're sitting on the bus with like arrows pointed at them. Like, and this person was sitting here, and that person was sitting there. But Andre calls Bad News Brown the N-word. And there's a lot of time devoted to this beef. We get like Bad News Brown stirring over it, and like.
It is funny because it does make me want to read a Bad News Brown comic. I'm like,
right. It feels like
right.
It feels like this chapter is just like a Bad News Brown chapter. Well, it's 12 pages devoted to this beef.
It's from Bad News Brown's shoot interview, which I'm not sure what a shoot interview is, but
a real interview.
Right.
Like
that means that they are talking to someone out of character and that they're saying what really.
Okay.
And Bad News famously was disliked for being kind of a kind of difficult hang. And kind of people didn't get along with him.
Well, no
but
shit.
I think it's
Everybody's
also
calling him the
the
N-word.
Yeah, I think the 80s is also very racist, and you've got a Olympic fighter guy who's just like, no, like, don't do that. Like, Bad News Brown, what was he? Was it wrestling? But he was a medalist in the Olympics. Like, he was not to be messed with in general.
Real name's like Alan Cage, Coage. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing anything right there, but Alan.
No idea.
Coage. I don't know. This is all before my era of like me even having my
He
favorite wrestling
was
pillows.
Yeah, I never knew him either. He's before my time.
Back in the 80s, and Roddy Piper famously, Peacock Network had to delete this. Roddy Piper famously painted himself half black to fight this guy.
Oh, no.
But
so he was difficult.
No.
Huh.
He was known for being difficult to work with, but he was truly like, he had studied judo, he had studied wrestling, like he was not a guy to mess with. Like, in real life. And he was also like huge, like 6'4", like 250 pounds, like not someone that anyone regular would want to get, on the bad side of. But Andre is also a gigantic person.
So he's a bronze medalist in judo from the 76 Olympics.
Wow.
I knew he was in the Olympics.
Well, Andre, at the end of this whole 12 pages of beef, just goes up and apologizes, and it's over. And Brad and friends like, oh, okay, cool.
Which I do appreciate. The book doesn't do the best job of explaining, but it's just like, Andre is from France. He doesn't understand this stuff, and like, Bad News is an American, or actually I think Canadian, black man who's like, no, you don't get to do this. This is not the same. Because Andre's like, I'm Polish. People make fun of Polish people. And he's like, no, that's not the same. You don't get to do that. And Andre's like, oh, okay.
But it doesn't exactly help that Andre, after this, just keeps on being drunk and rude. He's getting people pregnant. He's hitting on people's girlfriends. There's like a party at a hotel room, and he like completely trashes it while he's just play fighting with somebody. It's it doesn't paint him in the best light here.
Yeah. Who is that? That was what's his name? Who he wrestled in WWF? The giant. Was it?
I didn't write down the name.
Big John, whatever. Big John Studd or Blackjack Mulligan. One of those guys.
Blackjack Mulligan. That's who it was.
That name sounds familiar.
Then we get a segment that I guess it's like just the 1981 interview with Sports Illustrated, and I guess it's a quote from Andre that maybe is just kind of spread out over this little scene. I didn't actually write down what the quote was. Anyways, it's probably something thoughtful and insightful. At a certain point, this is one of those parts where I was like, this part doesn't feel like a comic book. It was just like the same. It's just Andre sitting there. Mm-hmm. And is it literally just like him sitting there, panel, talking? This is where he's on Letterman. But he keeps.
That's a couple of years later, yeah.
I'm wondering if, from a writing standpoint, though, is there that much like interview tape of Andre talking for real, or even like magazine articles with him with having actual quotes, considering English wasn't his first language?
Yeah, I don't know if there's that much first party source, because like, again, you talk about shoot interviews. Andre never did a shoot interview. He died before that was like a thing that happened. Okay, so I'm wondering if like Box Brown is literally taking every single piece of real Andre dialogue and putting it in the movie or in the book. Yeah. I mean, I think he is, because he kind of has to. And then there's so many kind of secondary sources about Andre. Like he is a larger than life figure. What isn't explained in this comic is like kind of the nature of wrestling changing, because it does go from like a sideshow attraction, like thing that's kind of a traveling circus thing, to being a bigger deal, at least for a while. In the 80s, my friends all had like the little Hulk Hogan pillows that you would wrestle and shit. Like, I remember wrestling being like a big thing. I remember all my friends like at daycare talking about WCW Monday Nitro. And At daycare talking about. Wait a
I
minute.
had to go to summer. I had to go to summer daycare through like 6th grade. So like 96.
I'm like, wait a minute. That doesn't sound right.
I had
'Cause
friends.
That was
I had friends who fucking were in Terminator 2 also as like 7 or 8 year olds.
okay. Okay.
I picked up all this from osmosis, but yeah, that the HBO
Friends with famous, I guess, abuser. What's his name from Terminator 2? The child.
Over Furlong.
Yeah, Furlong.
Okay, yeah, I don't know.
I have no
he
idea
went to your
where we
daycare?
are.
No, no, but
What happened?
But the HBO documentary is really interesting because literally it just cuts for 20 minutes and forgets Andre the Giant exists just to tell you about how it went from like traveling live shows to like television to pay-per-views, like that transition, and that's basically also when like Vince McMahon Jr. maybe bought
Yes, correct.
bought basically all the like the different local wrestling things or killed them or something, or took all their talent and then made it into a big nationwide television show.
Right. Yeah, it was really, not to get into it because it's not really in this comic, but like Rocky 2? Was it
Three.
Rocky 2 or Rocky 3? Rocky 3 comes out. Hulk Hogan's in it. And Hulk Hogan had been in WWF, but he wasn't like the top guy. But he's in a movie that's like a huge movie. So he comes back to WWF and becomes the guy. And they basically do a, kind of think of it as a leveraged buyout of the rest of all the regional wrestling companies and take it all over within about 3 years.
Yeah, that's crazy. And so that's so funny. It's like you can't talk. Like I remember watching that documentary. Like, why did we forget about? Why are we not talking about Andre the Giant? But also, like, it's critically important to this like point in wrestling history. And it's also what like makes Andre like a larger than life character, not just like a local legend of like different talents.
Right.
And stuff.
Right. Yeah. Like he traveled all over. People knew who he was. But yeah, the fact that wrestling suddenly becomes like a huge thing in the 80s kind of makes him bigger.
Yeah. So we also see like the whole Princess Bride thing. Oh, that's right. He has all his back pains coming up, and so he gets some surgery. And so after that, that's a good time for him to go film the Princess Bride. And he gets like it's a nice little page of him hanging out with each member of the cast, putting his hand
that's my
over
panel.
what's her name's
I
head.
love that panel. I took pictures of that and texted it to my parents. It's a really good page. Where like
It's
Robin
cute.
Wright was like, I'm cold, and he just stuck his hand on her head, which is weird, but I'm sure happened. And like Mandy Patinkin is like such a cool dude. Inigo Montoya just be like, "Do you like this man?" He goes, "Yeah, it's really nice. Like nobody looks at me. It's a pretty sweet deal."
Yeah, I mean, Mandy Patinkin famously difficult to work with.
Yes.
So yeah, the fact that they get along really well, and Andre loves being in this movie. There's not a whole lot because this is very rushed, but it's just like Billy Crystal becomes like his friend, and that's what My Giant later is based on. Is like their friendship. So it's just like he's going off and doing other things, and everybody's like, "Wow, you're so great," and he's just kind of used to what he does.
Yeah. So then he comes back to wrestling for the big Hogan versus Andre match at WrestleMania 3.
Are we skipping his big haircut scene? Because I think that's really funny. Yeah, we did skip that.
Sure,
was
go
fun.
for it.
Yeah, like he's going to Japan, and he's like, or just going on like a long trip, and he's like, I want to cut my hair.
Oh,
like I don't like
yeah.
my haircut anymore. Like I need to get rid of this. But instead of just getting a haircut, they like write it into the show that like two of the bad guys like tied him down and cut his hair. Oh my god! This the color commentator is like, this is the worst thing ever. And I like how those guys like are like the book makes it clear that those guys like sell things that aren't really even happening on screen or making it a bigger deal. And so Andre just got a haircut. This is how they did it. They wrote it in the story and made it like a big moment. And then he's going to come back after he's done filming Princess Bride. He's going to come back for revenge for them cutting his hair. It's stupid, but it absolutely like I would eat it up.
I mean, that's still a thing in wrestling. Hair versus hair matches are pretty common as well. And
more in Mexico, but it does exist.
Yes. I wouldn't say they're not common, but maybe 3 or 4 hair versus hair matches a year, something like that.
I feel like my son watches YouTube videos where people do stupid challenges like Kenny versus Spinny style, and somebody gets their hair cut, whoever loses. Like it's a popular low stakes win or loss condition.
Yeah. It'll grow back, but I love it.
Yeah, it is fun. And it'll grow back if your haircut is right. Kurt Angle, of course, famously lost his hair, never grew back.
Oh no.
Poor Kurt Angle. What a career. What a
Another
never mind.
like bad news, an Olympic champion.
Yes. Yes.
So anyway, yes, Andre goes on The Princess Bride. He loves showing people video of The Princess Bride. He loves to watch the VHS tape of the movie, which is very fun. And
It's a good
he's
movie.
like, oh, this is a great movie. Let's watch it again, everybody.
Was that in the comic? I don't remember that.
Yeah. When he watches it with Terry Funk, and then he falls asleep watching it, he's like, let's watch it again. Which is a famous story about Andre, is that he would just put it on in the backstage and just be like, let's just watch it.
Loved it, man.
It's a good movie. He's right.
So then now we get to WrestleMania 3, and
Terry Funk should have done the same thing about Roadhouse. He should have been like, oh, this is hey Andre, this is the part where he drop kicks his head off.
Oh.
He says, I used to fuck guys like you in prison. That's what Terry Funk sounds like. So
Okay,
I'm not.
I was wondering if
This isn't a insulting impression. This is what Terry Funk literally sounds like.
That's 100% inaccurate. We somehow got Terry Funk on the podcast just for this one moment. Bye, Terry.
I won't dispute it.
We'll see you later.
I will not dispute it.
Listen to Terry Funk interviews. That's what he sounds like. I'm not kidding.
All right. So we get the play-by-play on this Hogan versus Andre match. It's like 20 pages, but it's good. I think this is 100% the best part of the comic here, is just kind of going through that.
It is fun because I haven't watched WrestleMania 3 in a minute, but it's that was a huge match. It's probably, maybe Savage Hogan in WrestleMania 4 is a bigger match, but one of the biggest matches of all time. And it honestly, I think it does such a, the comic makes it seem oh, Andre's insulted by this or whatever, but it's just Hulk Hogan is so annoying in all of that stuff, watching the lead up to it, because he's oh, I love Andre. Andre's great. He's so good, but he never gives him a title shot. Andre very clearly visibly gets mad at this. And I'm Andre is right. Everyone is completely justified by their hatred of Hulk Hogan. Just like Randy Savage. Hulk Hogan left their match to take care of Miss Elizabeth, who was Randy Savage's manager. Outrageous.
So you bought in on all these plot lines I'm seeing.
There's a lot. Every plot line. They're all terrible. They're all so bad.
But
it's amazing because Hulk Hogan is the avatar of a 4-year-old, where he's the main guy, and every time he's not, he's the poochie. And every time he's not in front of the camera, everyone should be where's Hulk Hogan? And it's just wait a minute, Andre's undefeated. Andre is your best friend. Give Andre a match. What's wrong with you?
So Chris, I want to go into the so I feel this is important because the writer Box Brown in his foreword talks about just reading wrestling magazines constantly. One, was that your experience? And two, you said, I haven't watched WrestleMania 3 in a minute. I don't watch the Super Bowl from 10 years ago multiple times. So what about, do you have a tape of WrestleMania 3, a torrent, or
So when the WWE Network came out, did I watch a bunch of WrestleManias? Yes. Yeah. WrestleMania 3 is famous, not for this match. It's famous for the Randy Savage versus Ricky Steamboat match, which a lot of people consider to be the best, actual wrestling match of that era. It's really good. It's 15 minutes. Anybody who's on the fence about wrestling, it's so good. It tells such a great story. And then Hulk Hogan and Andre kind of flex at each other for 10 minutes.
Yep.
Okay.
There you go.
Did I would read a lot of wrestling magazines or watch all the wrestling shows in the 90s?
I was only I just watched whatever was on TV and maybe a few wrestling websites, but nowadays I just read message boards and stuff. Magazines were never. But it's also I think to answer your question here, wrestling is rewatchable in the sense that it isn't just not about who wins at the end. And it is, 'cause part of the storyline is I just always compare it to a dance, and it's just you can choreograph a dance like all the way down to every little movement with a whole bunch of people, or you can improvise a dance with two people with whatever their styles look like, and it's different every time. And if there's people you really like and you're just like, yeah, I want to see these two dance with each other.
I remember,
and that's kind of what makes it exciting.
I remember a friend on Ric Flair's last match. He was late to the bar because he had to watch Ric Flair's last match against Shawn Michaels. I've never seen it, but it sounded like the greatest like drama I've ever heard. Like Ric Flair was like told like, you've had too many concussions, man. Like you need to retire. And like he was fighting against like his best friend. This is the way it was told to me. His best friend Shawn Michaels, and Shawn Michaels like, man, like I want to win, but I also like you need to stop wrestling, so I have to defeat you, so you don't wrestle anymore and don't like end up in a coma or like with concussions and you're brain dead for your family. But Ric Flair's like, no, I'm gonna fucking win. And then like, but Ric Flair's not good enough. And then like,
no, I mean like that. You know, wrestling is very good at ring drama. That is a rare match. I don't know if it made me cry, but it made
I'm
people
getting misty
cry.
talking about it. I've never even fucking seen it. I've just like heard about it.
I would say it's like probably the most melodramatic match of all time, like without a doubt, and that I've seen in America. Okay, that's enough.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if I've seen a match that has actually made me misty-eyed. But I know
I've
that
cried
match
a lot during wrestling. Oh yeah, I
that
cried
match
on
definitely
Friday night.
did.
Fuego got his contract.
Friday night, come on, Kia.
I cried for Fuego.
You're like, Britt Baker, can you do it? Oh, can you win?
No, not for that. I knew she was gonna win. Fuego though, cried for Fuego.
No, yeah.
You watch this moment and you tell me you're not crying, bawling your eyes out. Happy for this.
I was happy for him, but I wasn't crying.
I was ugly crying worse than he was on stage. All right.
He did cry on camera, which was cool. We found out later that he did not know that was going to happen.
He did not know it was coming. Yeah, he got a contract on live TV. Yeah.
So,
they did they did a match where if you can beat this monster and beat him for his title, we'll also give you a contract. And he was not going to win it, but like for that brief moment, it made you believe that he would. But he was already so popular with the fans that after he lost, they came out and gave him the contract anyways. Great stuff. Anyways, we're getting very specific about specific times in wrestling that I've cried. So should I go back through all of them now?
Yeah, I was going to say, what's some other times you cried? Yeah, did I cry at these?
I remember Sammy Owens Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens. Yeah.
That didn't make me cry, but I was very upset when Kevin Owens betrayed his friend.
I was bawling at the happy tears of him winning the title, and then like maniacally laughing at the turn in the middle of it. It's great.
That was a good one.
Wrestling is good at making me laugh maniacally while I'm crying. That's so good.
Yeah. What are some other good ones? I know a lot of people cried when Undertaker lost to Brock Lesnar. That was famously made a lot of people cry.
Yeah.
Didn't make me cry.
Not me.
I'm not that big a fan of the Undertaker, but he had won like 20 some matches in a row, and then Brock Lesnar beat him, concussed him first too.
Ooh, yeah. All right, we gotta get moving here. So back to the story here. Andre's done with the match. We close this book with an interview with his 12-year-old daughter that he's only seen like 4 times ever. That's kind of weird. He keeps wrestling in Japan,
which I think Bill O'Reilly was on, or he might have been on Hard Copy. I'm not sure.
He was on one of those shows. Yeah.
Those kind of like trashy news mags that came on after Wheel of Fortune. You were syndicated.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And he keeps wrestling in Japan through '92, which I don't think I knew that part at all.
I assumed that his career ended like when he's like, I am done. I have been defeated by Hogan. Hogan is now the star.
I mean, Hulk Hogan did say that they died a few days after the match, but it was 4 years later. Hulk Hogan's just a notorious liar.
Yep. But yeah, then Andre just died in his sleep in January of '93, and that's his story.
Yeah,
Andre the Giant.
Yeah, he was part of the Colossal Connection. I remember that with Haku, who was not even mentioned really in this book at all.
No.
I understand why, I guess, but it's just kind of funny because it's just like he's like the Letterman interview I watched. they're like, Letterman's like, who are you wrestling tonight? And he's like, oh, it's me and Tony Atlas and one other guy against the Samoans. And I'm like, oh, Haku's one of those. So it's just kind of funny that Haku becomes his tag team partner who has to carry him when he anymore.
Interesting. I never knew. But yeah, that's the book. I mean, the parts that it does well, it does really, really well. I just wish it was like, it feels like this thing had a lot of dead air that could have been filled with more stuff. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Not perfect, but definitely worth reading, especially if you don't know much about what's going on, I guess.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I think all the scenes where it break down the wrestling matches are probably where it cooks the most. And I think it's like really, really good. And then the other scenes are kind of like vignettes that are kind of strung together that kind of give you an idea of Andre the Giant as a person. I think it's a good I mean, I don't know of many biographical comics about real people, just in general.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's also, I mean, like, outside of manga, I don't know what other wrestling biographies you would get. Because, of course, famously, Black Tiger, a manga character that became a wrestler. That it exists in Japan, but I don't think it's a big a deal in America.
Oni Press did come out with another Andre the Giant biography like 1 or 2 years later after this. That's like 100 pages long. Some people on Amazon said it was better, but I'm like, okay.
Anybody can write one.
Yeah,
maybe I'll write.
Yeah, I can write one right now. Andre defeats.
Just make a WrestleMania
Big John Studd.
WrestleMania 3 comic, like the lead up to it, and then Macho Man Randy Savage against who I can't remember who you said at the end.
Ricky Steamboat, yeah, the Dragon.
The Dragon.
Kia, you agree with me, right? That's an all-time great match.
I'm
Have you not seen that recently?
Not very recently at all. I don't even know if I've seen it all the way through because I know I've seen bits and pieces of WrestleMania 3, but I don't know. There's another thing of me just like it's harder for me to go back and watch a lot of other wrestling when I don't have as much of a connection to the people. Like it's kind of like music in a sense that like, hey, modern music is like people living in the now times making things that I can connect with, Anyways, I like art. That's all. I don't.
I mean, you don't have to watch all of it. I will say a lot of it of WrestleMania 3 is bad. There's 12 matches. Most of them are bad.
I just don't watch WWE anymore either. Like that's the thing. There's so much wrestling out there, and I'm not going to watch the worst of it. That's I'm going to watch the rest of it. But I know. I shouldn't.
Yeah,
say
WrestleMania 3 famously one of the best shows. The Pontiac Silverdome, huge deal.
Over WWE.
Yeah, I don't blame you for that. Andre seems like a complicated character. I do appreciate the moment in the story where at WrestleMania 3, I don't know if this is true or not. I assume it is it's probably based on Bad News' own shoot interview, but where he runs into Bad News like backstage at WrestleMania 3, which is weird because he's in WWF at the time, and he's like, "Oh, Bad News is here," because like he only knew him from Japan when they had gotten in a fight, and he's just like, "Hey, are we cool now?" And he's like, "Yeah, we're cool." So I guess Bad News forgives him for being kind of accidentally racist in the earlier '80s in '87.
Yep, that's the redemption arc we needed at the very end.
Yeah, which I mean, I would read a comic about Bad News Brown. What an interesting character. Vince mentioned won a bronze medal in judo. He's I think Canadian, comes to America as a heel wrestler as a black man in the '80s. Like I'm sure there was a lot of racism.
Oh yeah, because Glow has a character like that like basically is like. Yeah, like minstrel theater, like some of the characters, like I don't want to be portraying this character as like a black person. Like I'm making my race look bad, and then also like being a villain. Like this is fucked up, and then people boo me in real life. Yeah,
Vince, I'm gonna send you the New Jack documentary. I think you got to see that one.
All right. Yeah, just kind of a weird deal. I mean, like Ron Simmons, famously the first world champion African American wrestler in like 1991. which it seems way too late, but that's wrestling for you.
Yeah. I'm looking through my notes and I was like, oh, all right, wrapping this thing up. Wait, we got a whole other comic we got to talk about.
Let's talk about Scrooge McDuck. Scrooge McDuck famously no-sold. Who did he no-sell? The Barbarian.
The Barbarian.
So we're moving from the life and legend to the life and times.
The life and times of Scrooge McDuck. All right, we've read a little bit of Scrooge McDuck in the past, but we've read like the classic stories from when was that? Like the 30s, the 40s, the 50s? What era were we reading?
The 30s.
I don't remember.
I want to say it was
I would say the 40s.
Well, we were reading some of that classic, that classic Carl Barks stuff and the old Disney comics and everything. What we are reading now is from the early 90s by a guy named Don Rosa, and he loved the old Carl Barks comics that we read, and we also loved them. But Don Rosa did something we did not do. He went in, he read all the comics, and noted every time that Scrooge McDuck like said a thing about his past, and wrote it down, assembled a timeline, and like wrote the whole history of Scrooge McDuck in comic form in 12 parts. So that's what we're reading.
I love how he protects himself in his foreword, though, against like nerds. He's like, this is my interpretation still, even though I am the expert and I went through all this shit and notated everything, and I know I'm absolutely right. It's still my interpretation, so don't get mad at me.
Yeah, but like, what if in those old comics, like Scrooge was lying? That's possible. Yeah, and something we'll never know.
Yeah, you never know. There's not contradictory like 1950s or 60s issues that are at Clan McDuck's castle or whatever.
Where a cemetery gravestone is wrong. One says 47, one says 49 or something.
Oh my god! You never know.
So let's just jump right into it. This first issue is called "The Last of the Clan McDuck." And it opens with a little young Scrooge. It's his 10th birthday. Oh, he looks just like Huey and Dewey and Louie.
Yes.
Yeah. It doesn't open with him saying "none of your business."
That's right. It's like there's a little scene introducing the whole thing where he's swimming in his pile of gold. It's like 100 feet high. Is that what it was? 100 yards high?
In his money bin where he's swimming.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's got his first dime in like a glass case thing. And don't you want to know the story of how he got his first dime? That's when he breaks the fourth wall and tells the reader. He'll never tell you, but
none of your gold or business.
There we go. But it's his 10th birthday. Dad has taken him to Castle McDuck, which is like their ancient ancestral home, but it's been abandoned since the 17th century because a monstrous devil dog drove them out of their home in 1675. And it's like the late 1800s now. So, they've never gone back. What happened afterwards is that Captain Seafoam McDuck ended up making a trading business, but he got swindled. His ship sank. What was the deal? They were going to deliver horseradish to Jamaica. Is that what it was? I don't know. But then we get the story of Sir Quackley's gold. We get a lot of history here of just all the different McDucks that have been around. But Sir Quackley McDuck, that gold could restore the McDuck family, but it is lost forever. Quackley, go ahead.
He was defending Macbeth from, I guess, reality, but also the Shakespeare play, which was the wrong horse to bet on, for one. And then he protected himself. He's like, I gotta protect the gold, so he built like a giant vault, but built it around himself and didn't have an exit.
Walled himself in.
Yeah, so he's stuck in the wall. He's just in the wall. Everyone looked for him, couldn't find the treasure. Too bad. So while little Scrooge McDuck and his dad are like reminiscing around this castle, talking about the McDuck name, these neighbors, like these villagers from around there, come by and they're like, "Hey, what are you McDucks doing back here? Aren't y'all going to run away again?" And they're like, "Oh, we're not scared of the devil dog." But then they hear the devil hound again, and they like run away. They're like, "Woo!" And they're like, "Oh my God, it's back!" But then we find out these damn villagers just had a dog costume, and it's the same costume from 200 years ago. They've been tricking the ducks into just like not being there. These guys suck.
Yep.
These guys are terrible. And then, I have problems with this because they were clearly running drills. Like they have not used this costume in 200 years, but they were prepared. Like, if these ducks show up again, we need somebody to get in that costume ASAP. We need to know who it's going to be. We need to know when they're going to pop out, and then we're going to get them out of here again. They were ready to go. They had to be running drills for it. I don't know.
Well, and you say they suck, but on the other hand, the McDucks are basically feudal landlords. So
they do, the McDucks do suck as well.
yeah,
Yeah,
not great. So maybe it's for the best.
But they're poor now, and so I have to side with labor here. But
Okay.
the poor McDuck family is eating. Uncle Jake inspires little Scrooge, like, oh, we got to go fighting. You got to make something of yourself. So little Scrooge McDuck starts shining shoes, and in his first job, he gets swindled again. They pay him an American dime, which is no good because they're not in America yet.
I know he always talks about his number one dime. Was the fact that like this was in Scotland and he got a dime? Is that like a retcon of like this is how he got swindled, or was this always like part of the Scrooge like thing that his number one dime was always him being swindled?
Then you were asking literally the wrong people.
Yeah, we have no idea.
I'm asking,
but I like to believe it is. I believe it's kind of a retcon. I would say that it feels right. It was like, hey, why did he get a dime in Scotland? Well, it was a mistake.
Yeah, it does feel like a retcon. Yeah, I mean, his number one dime is kind of a famous thing that Scrooge has. It's in the new DuckTales series, 2017 or 18.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's like like I remember watching a Home Improvement episode. Like, we're gonna frame your first paycheck.
It's a thing.
Yeah.
Why would you frame your first paycheck? You got to cash it.
That's what Brad said on.
That's a bit.
All right, so
friend of your stupid minds, Zachary Ty Bryan
of the Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift,
and First Kid.
Oh, he's in that.
Probably more. Yeah.
I've worked in two plugs for you, Chris. Thank you very much.
All right, so McDuck. They're all McDucks. So Scrooge doesn't get he keeps shining shoes. Like, he doesn't learn his lesson, I guess.
No. His dad swindles him specifically, or his uncle. They're like, we're going to specifically give this, which is going to piss him off, and he is a fucking asshole when he gets pissed off. So he's going to work harder.
Okay.
This is going to.
He does work harder. He starts helping his dad pay the bills, but he asks his dad for receipts. He's building up a business. He's selling wood to the local villagers until he finally is like, oh, I can make more money selling peat to all the like moss, like peat to all the richer folks around here.
I'll swindle the rich folks into thinking they're buying something fancy that's not, and I'll get more money.
Yeah,
which is
brilliant.
A savvy pick.
How do you say, damn, he's right?
Yeah. So he's also seems to be getting all this moss.
He's gonna sell kale to Pizza Hut.
He's also getting all this moss from down near the castle, I think, and I guess he's getting closer and closer to where the castle's at, or something like that. And he sees all these shitty neighbors digging up the McDuck cemetery looking for Quackley's gold. That's a fun sentence to read out loud, by the way. I didn't know it was going to be so fun when I wrote it out. But they spot him. They spot Scrooge, and they're chasing after him because they really hate the McDucks. They are not allowed for a second. But then another McDuck helps him duck into the castle.
No, not a McDuck.
We don't know that.
Yeah,
we don't know.
He says, I'm just a lowly duck who lives here. Oh, it's crazy that you think I'm a McDuck. Oh my gosh. Not like I'm
as you know, you and your uncle are the last living McDucks.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, they telegraph it pretty quickly. He's a guy. We get a little tour. They meet some of the other ducks around here. Who else? I didn't really write down these ducks. There was a guy who got
There's great shit here though. He was showing him these huge suits of armor. He's like, those are not for us because we're tiny ducks. And then people
we don't wear those.
People have helmets. They don't have good peripheral vision to see below themselves, and we just kneecap them as little ducks. It's great.
Yeah, that was
it's
great.
A great image. That's also a great.
That was good.
Yeah.
They've collected all these suits of armor. They do come in handy because he stuffs a bunch of peat in a suit of armor and sets it on fire, puts it on a horse, and scares the shit out of the villagers. I really like the horse saying "whew" afterwards because that horse was a real horse.
They also ran so quick that they ran over the quicksand.
Oh yeah, they ran right past.
They were too quick for quicksand.
They were that was my panel of the week though, was with this big suit of armor with this flaming thing. It looked
It's
cool.
the cover of my Life and Times of Scrooge Mcduck fanographics from
What?
like yeah the
The
yellow
cover of the whole thing. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
the main image is like Scrooge like dreaming about he's like sitting there with the treasure chest looking at like a photo album and he's dreaming of the flaming suit of armor on a horse. That's the cover of like the
Wow.
collected edition. You
Wow.
picked out the right panel, Kia. You'd be a good editor.
I
You'd be
did.
like
Yeah,
that's
I was gonna
the
say it is a cool image. So
So Sir Quackley then is like, I guess this happened before. He's like inspiring Scrooge, telling him, "Oh, you're a McDuck, you got to be good." And then it says that the dime has to be a sign. You got to go to America. And he's like, "Oh, you think? All right, that's his plan." So he's off to America. We do get confirmation from Sir Quackley that he is a ghost. He's talking to the other ghosts. He did not show his treasure to Scrooge because he had to earn it
Yeah.
for himself.
yeah,
Okay.
I do like that moment where Porkins or whatever the fat ghost is like,
Fat
why didn't you tell him where the treasure is? And he's like, no, he has to earn it for himself.
Yep, makes sense to me. So Scrooge is off. His family gives him his great-great-grandpa's gold teeth and silver pocket watch. And the journey begins.
Yeah, and
Wow.
he leaves his two sisters behind, which I don't know the Duck family tree, but I have to imagine either Hortense or the other one is Donald's mom.
Oh, wow.
One
I
of
didn't even
them must
begin to
be.
think about that.
Because he's Uncle Scrooge to Donald, right?
Right.
I don't
Huh.
know which one though. We'll find
I
out
think
though,
we might
because
find out.
because this is
Yeah.
the whole life of Scrooge McDuck. I think the next issue, it's got a beginning like panel, and my thing. This one took place in 1877. The next one's in 1880, and then
Okay.
Cowboy Times
Alright.
in 1882. So this should be fun.
We get Cowboy Time soon. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I remember there's a family tree in the original version I had, which there's like a branch covering. Which one is the sister that is Donald's mother?
It might not be clear. There might be like one as you were saying, like a lie or like a retcon, or they could have said two different.
Who knows?
They could have said Donald's mom's name, and then forgot they did and came up with a different name, and so they just decided having.
Shit.
Yeah.
Shit. Well, who knows? We'll wait and see what happens.
Because that happened definitely with the nephews. I know that they had like 3 or 4 different names for Huey, Dewey, and Louie's mom.
They had a mom?
They had to. Yeah.
I guess so.
I mean, that's how ducks reproduce, yeah.
That's how ducks work.
They don't reproduce through cellular mitosis.
You don't know that. You ever
I
seen a
don't.
duck reproduce?
I've never seen a duck fuck. No.
God damn it. All right. So next time we're gonna, of course, keep reading Life and Times number 2, I guess. Yeah. And then we're going on to, well, first we're also gonna read. Oh my God! There's a movie coming out. Did y'all know this? I did not.
They're
It's
still making
called
those?
Shang-Chi, the Master of Kung Fu. Is that what it's called?
No,
I know that's
Shang-Chi
who the
and
character is.
the Ten Rings. I don't know the subtitle.
Oh,
Something about the Ten
okay.
Rings.
Yeah, something about rings.
It's the
Something
Mandarins.
about rings.
It's the Mandarins group, and the people who kidnapped Tony
Okay.
Stark at the beginning of Iron Man 1. It's that gang. They're back.
Right.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, Shang-Chi is getting his own movie.
So Guy Pearce is in this movie, or
No. There's another dude that's not Ben Kingsley. There's actually a real Mandarin who I think might be Shang-Chi's dad, although in the comics that we're about to read, spoiler alert for what our comic we're about to read, I think his dad is Fu Manchu, which, like Yellow Claw, sounds bad.
Yeah. I mean,
Well-
Yellow Claw and Fu Manchu are the same, basically.
Okay.
Racist characters.
Yeah, stereotype, caricatures, all that. When were I didn't write down the year that these comics were from. But this was
73 and
from
74.
Okay. They're from Master of Kung Fu 15 through 19, although technically 15 and 16 have a different name called the Special Marvel Edition. Then they just like changed the whole series to Master of Kung Fu. So I think you can pretty much, if it's Master of Kung Fu 15 through 19, you're probably good. Steve Englehart and Jim Starlin, who are just Jim Starlin, big favorite of ours. Have we got
Thanos.
anything with Steve Englehart?
He did a Captain America run that I think was very long. I don't know I think Chris, you said it wasn't good, but I know it's been collected as like one of those like bigger monumental Captain America runs.
Yeah, he did Captain America, Batman, Avengers. I'm not a fan, but people like him.
Yeah, it should be.
So
I don't know.
Go
I
ahead.
don't know much about this, but it's where to begin, and he's gonna fight his dad, which I know he's supposed to fight his dad in the movie, so should have some parallels. I do
Yeah.
know Shang-Chi
My
also, the issues right after we read this got taken over by Doug Mensch, who created Moon Knight, I think, and Paul
yeah.
Galassi was the artist. Um,
Yes,
and then they did
who we covered for Black Widow. One of
Yeah.
couple
the
episodes ago.
backup story.
a couple episodes ago, and then they returned in the '90s for a Marvel Max series of Shang-Chi, which I'm like, I'm not going to read a '90s Marvel Max Shang-Chi. That just sounds like a recipe for disaster. So
Yeah, well, I'll check it out for everyone and tell you if it's
actually,
bad.
Yeah.
I don't think Max books are even on
So
Marvel Unlimited. So
Well, I'll check it out anyway.
well, I haven't mentioned we are also there's one more comic we're reading that has not come up yet, but after the old 70s Master of Kung Fu, we're gonna read a more modern one, number 126, written by CM Punk. What?
Wow,
More
Phil
more
Brooks.
wrestling?
that's a
What?
wrestler, right?
Is that his
CM
real
Punk?
name?
Yes,
I don't know his real name. Yeah, CM Punk
yes.
is a
Phil Brooks is his
wrestler.
real name.
I didn't know that actually. One of the most popular wrestlers of the modern era, who is going to be making his return to AEW. Very
Well,
exciting times. Probably
I was gonna say
not
if it
confirmed.
turns out he
Not
doesn't,
confirmed.
we'll look like idiots. AJ Lee's
Well,
husband.
no. Listen, if it turns out he doesn't, we're not the ones who are going to look like idiots. There's a lot of people who are going to look like idiots.
I do
Yeah,
love
AJ Lee's
though because the cover of it has has the credits with the people's last names. It doesn't say like his first name; it just says Punk. 'Cause I
Punk.
guess that's
I've
ostensibly his
always
character's last name.
Punk is from an era of wrestling when it was just like WWE dominating the landscape, and I hadn't discovered the international stuff yet, so I wasn't really watching. But I always hold a grudge against CM Punk because if I'm like just trying to search for like new punk music or something, his shit just comes up constantly, and it's not even music. His name
It's
is Punk, and he's like,
because your
man,
Google is probably calibrated. Kia is
Yeah,
probably
right.
looking up wrestling. Probably.
Right. Yeah, you're like Punk
This was
hero.
yeah,
I have to give you a
Punk.
wrestling match.
Terrible. But yeah, so we're gonna read that. Who drew this comic? I hope it was.
I don't
CM Punk.
recognize him. He did the Secret Wars Shang-Chi book also. Like that was.
What was the name?
Oh, I already lost it. I do not know.
All right.
Well,
Let's see.
that's
I'm gonna look it
not
up real
that-
quick. We have to know. We have to know. It is Dalibor Talajic. Is that right?
Yeah, that's accurate. That's what I saw also, but I didn't remember it enough to remember it. But yes.
That's a tough name to remember. I've never heard of this person.
Yeah. So I mean, the cover looks okay. It's like it looks like it's gonna be kind of a jokey Shang-Chi thing, which I think they have to kind of go for. Like, can he do this
Yeah.
and get ice cream at the same time and save the city? One of those comics should be fun.
Why is CM Punk writing a Master of Kung Fu? Okay, well I guess he
Well,
fights.
He was writing like a whole.
Yeah, I was gonna say, 'cause
wasn't he
he's
writing
such a
Hulk?
great UFC fighter. I thought he was writing Thor.
Hulk
Well,
or
whatever.
No
Thor,
idea.
whatever.
CM Punk wrote comics. We'll look all this up. We'll tell you all about CM Punk, the writer who also sometimes wrestled.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, former wrestler 8 years ago.
Has
Yeah.
it been that long? Wow.
It's been a long time
wow.
since he wrestled.
But yeah, whew, boy, that's it. All right, what else is going on? I got nothing to plug. Vince, you got anything to plug?
I have not made a new That Was a Game episode, but I promised myself I'd make one episode a month, and so we're overdue. We're halfway through August, so there will be one coming out soon on
What's
our
it about?
YouTube channel. It's either going to be about Super Luigi Brothers or Spanky's Quest for the Game Boy. I'm not sure which one I want to go.
Oh, they just put Spanky's Quest on the virtual console.
Yeah, the Super Nintendo ones,
Ooh.
but I have to do everything is video game adjacent for spin-offs
Yeah,
and sequels that
yeah.
aren't there, and I'm like, I do know how to talk about Spanky's Quest Game Boy. I can talk your ear off of that one. So, or Super Luigi Brothers. I can talk about that one also. Not New Super Luigi U, Super Luigi Brothers, a real game that Nintendo released.
I don't know.
Correct.
Chris, how about you? What's going on?
I recently had our new episode of Your Stupid Minds come out. Cradle to the Grave, DMX, Jet Li. Knock Knock, Open Up the Door, It's Real. It's Tom Arnold's also there for some reason.
So there were two DMX movies where Anthony Anderson and Tom Arnold were also in it.
Yes,
And
correct.
y'all got confused and picked the wrong one.
Who knows?
This is
if
the
we
kayfabe
picked
of
the
your
right one.
Facebook, your Facebook profile, your official Facebook page. That's the
Yeah,
kayfabe.
who knows if we picked the right one? We picked the one with Jet Li, not the one with Steven Seagal. But he was in 2 in a row. And at the end of Cradle to the Grave, spoiler alert for that movie, Anthony Anderson and Tom Arnold reference that movie. The movie that already happened.
Like character-wise, or they're like, hey, did you go see that movie Exit Wounds?
Yeah, they're like recasting the movie we just saw and being like, you know who we should get? The guy who made this DMX Steven Seagal movie and talk about that movie.
So weird.
Bizarre.
It was a good episode, though. I enjoyed it. I listened to that today.
Yep, it's good. Check it out.
Check it out. Well, I think that's it. I am going to head to bed. It's I'm a sleepy boy. That's all I'm gonna plug. My dreams. I bet they're good.
Not me. I grow every day stronger, like Andre the Giant.
Well. Yeah, Vince. Good episode. Good job. I love you.
I love you too.
Chris. Good episode. Good work. I love you.
You're no Bonnie Prince Charlie. Sorry, that was from Scrooge Mcduck.
And we're out.
Just end it. We're done. Bye.